Welcome. Today's story impacts every brand that has or wants to have a brand on a retailer's shelf. Let's face it, retail's pay to play. It's expensive. It's even more expensive if you don't have a clear understanding of what the retailers expect from your brand. Mistakes can cost you dearly, so you need to avoid them at all costs, pun intended. This is a huge reason why 80% of natural brands fail within the first year. I'm committed to changing that. It all begins with having a clear path forward that helps you navigate around the bottlenecks that derail most brands. It begins with a solid go to market strategy. There are ways to explode sales and save you valuable time and money, but first you need to know what retailers expect from you, in addition to how to work with and manage brokers, agencies, and distributors. This means that you need to have a clear understanding of how the retailer game is played before you adopt any of the creative brand building strategies we discuss in other podcast episodes. For today's episode, I brought in an expert and industry icon to help make sense of this, Bob Burke. Bob Burke's superpower is helping brands understand what retailers expect and teaching you how to play the retail game. Before you play any game, you need to know the rules. The better you know the rules, the more effective your strategies will impact your sales. The better you understand the game, the easier it will be to level the playing field between your brand and any competitive brand in any channel. Bob, thank you so much for coming on today. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey to natural products consulting?
Thanks, Dan. I'm happy to be here. And the quick thumbnail is I've been consulting now for about 22 years, mostly around helping to bring natural, organic, and specialty products to market across all classes of trade. At this point, have worked in many categories. Probably two-thirds of what I do ends up being with food and beverage. The rest, pretty much everything else: supplements, personal care, cleaning, pet, you name it. Along the way, I've done a how-to guide reference book called the Natural Products Field Manual. I also do seminars a few times a year. I do a 2-day sales seminar and 1 day on raising capital. The next ones will be in Boston in December. And you can see all of this at naturalconsulting.com. We're really around important things to think about as an early stage company. So it certainly involves sales, but it's me sort of walking people through a little bit of feasibility, understanding the importance of velocity, understanding the importance of gross margin, putting a fundamental plan together. And then what comes out of that, what unfolds, is the execution piece about brokers, contract sales, agreeing on objectives, how to get the right fit.
Right.
So I've also served on a number of boards and advisory boards. So I'm currently on the board of directors of companies like King Arthur Flour, Orgain, Saffron Road, FarmWise, Cali Flour, and Ecofish. And then I usually have the privilege of speaking, presenting, or doing something at the major trade shows and conferences. And then, interesting for me, increasingly I'm doing more work with international companies coming into the U.S., and so a lot of that is around go-to-market and connecting them up with the right resources, whether they be brand management companies, brokers, distributors, etc. So for me, I really enjoy what I do. It's sort of lifelong learning in terms of how the world is evolving and changing around us by the week. And so staying current with that is exciting and rewarding. And prior to consulting, I ran marketing and sales at Stonyfield Farm, the organic yogurt company.
I appreciate your sharing that, and thank you for coming on podcast episode 99. I actually listened to it yesterday to kind of re-engage and kind of remember some of the things we talked about. Go-to-market strategy is such a critically important thing for every small and emerging brand. So when you talk about go-to-market strategies, what should early stage companies be thinking about?
Well, probably the biggest thing is starting, at a maybe a 30,000 foot level and getting clarity on your objectives, understanding over what period of time, and then understanding what resources you have to put against them. So a little bit of invoking Stephen Covey and beginning with the end in mind. So if you think about, if you're an early stage company, what outcome are you looking to shape? Are you looking to build it and sell it to Kraft, Unilever, Nestle, or are you building it for succession? Are you looking to have a long-term business? And where are you on the spectrum where you're running a business to maximize growth versus running to maximize profitability? And from that, a lot of things unfold in terms of, what kind of capital you might need, how fast you need to grow, what's in your innovation pipeline, how you're going about investing in brand building, and so on and so on. But once you sort of get some clarity on that, and you're thinking about a launch and thinking about go-to-market, the first thing to really be honest with yourself is what I'm planning to offer truly innovative, have a reason to be in the market. And you, Dan, being an expert in category management, it's thinking about the basic category management argument in terms of, every time you sit in front of a retailer, broker, distributor, investor, they're putting you through the filter of, is this really innovative and going to grow the category, or am I just swapping sales from one pocket to another? And so answering that question of, are you attracting a new user? Are you trading someone up to a higher price point, more penny profit, higher ring, higher margin, etc.? Thinking about that. After that, it's going through a little bit of a feasibility step of, do you have rewarding and forgiving gross margins? In other words, when I talk about gross margin, I'm really talking about, think about a P&L where in your gross to net sales, you take out your returns, discounts, allowances, and trade spending, i.e. the money you spend with distributors and retailers to get you to net sales, minus your cost of goods is your gross profit, and your gross profit divided into your net sales is what everybody refers to as gross margin. So if you're talking to an investor, a commercial bank, a strategic, that's how they define gross margin. And in a beautiful world, your gross margin is somewhere in the high 30s, low 40s. Of course, the more the merrier. If you're in the mid 30s, low 30s, because you're early and you don't have much scale, but you have a pathway to get to 40, that's okay. But if you're in the teens or 20s, it's kind of a non-starter, and it's time to go back to the drawing board and rethink your offering, your case pack size, ingredients, formulation, etc., to see if there's a way to get to that sustainable gross margin level. Because without a good gross margin, you're either going to be funding losses through continual capital raises that result in dilution for you, or you're not going to have enough money to invest in brand building, trade support, etc., other things that are going to be necessary to have a viable business. So gross margin is really important.
That makes so much sense. So thanks for breaking that down and sharing that. Let's back way up. So when you're working with a brand, an emerging brand, and they're getting ready to pitch for the first time, and then before they do that, before they present their product to retail, what are some of the things that you would help a brand with? Like, for example, how do you map out their growth plan, and how do you set them up to pitch properly and get the funding that they need?
So those are very good questions. Let's talk about mapping out a growth plan first. In almost every case, I recommend that people do a pilot, and ideally it's in their backyard, meaning whatever market you happen to be in, if you can start to get your product into 10, 20, 30 stores and see evidence of it selling off the shelf, right? There are a few things more important than the topic of velocity, right? Your rate of sale off the shelf, and almost always expressed as units per SKU, per store, per week. And so understanding what that benchmark is, because you've done your homework and you've invested in some data from spins or other syndicated data, or you've talked to a friendly buyer who will give you an idea of what those hurdle rates are in the category. So you have an understanding of what those expectations are in terms of how you're going to be evaluated. Because once you're on the shelf of a store, especially a chain, the clock's ticking where you need to be really proving yourself. And so you doing a little bit of a pilot where you can have an opportunity to sort of validate all the assumptions you had coming in about what's the right price point, the right size, these are the right flavors, and see evidence of consumer acceptance, right? Velocity is the ultimate measure of product market fit. So seeing it sell off the shelf, that's vital. And I think once you see evidence of that, then you can start expanding into other stores. And for most companies who are offering natural, organic, and specialty products, they usually start in those channels because they tend to be less expensive, more forgiving, good match with the consumer. And so if you're in, going into natural food stores, if you're going into specialty stores, you can certainly start there. And then as you see ongoing evidence of growth, hitting acceptable velocities, etc., then the normal thing is to start to migrate into more mainstream retailers. That can be supermarket chains like Kroger, Ahold, Safeway, Wegmans. It can be mass accounts like Target and Walmart. And of course, if you have a shelf-stable product, most people are starting online. And so Amazon is Amazon. They're the lion's share of e-commerce right now. But then there are other very good e-com platforms like, Thrive Market and others, depending on your category. So early pre-revenue companies almost always think about e-commerce, piloting in a region, growing in the natural and specialty channels, and then going into more mainstream channels. And then eventually, maybe year 2, year 3, you can start thinking about club and filling out distribution. And then, of course, depending on what your category is, there might be alternative channels available to you, food service, convenience store, chain drug. And for a lot of shelf-stable items, don't laugh, but TJX has become a good customer. That's Home Goods, TJ Maxx, and Marshalls, where for many years they were thought of as a liquidator. Now they're doing quite a bit of business in natural and specialty shelf-stable items with very little stigma attached to being sold there.
Interesting. I didn't realize that. I mean, I had heard stories, but that makes a lot of sense. I mean, after all, those are the customers that they want. So, Bob, when a company is thinking about their go-to-market strategy, at what point do they want to get in front of an investor? And then how do they put together this plan to go down the path that you just suggested? There's a lot there, I know.
Sure.
But, I mean, what's the logical step?
So let's, before I go into, so when it comes to mapping out a plan, a lot of it is just, spending a little bit of time with Excel, walking through some of the things I touched on. So you can sort of do a back of the envelope P&L where you can say, if I'm looking to retail at, say, $3.99, or we'll make it easier math. We're going to retail at $4.99. If a retailer is working on 40%, then the store is paying $3 for something they're selling for $5. Because when we talk about retail and distributor margins, it's always a function of their selling price, not over their cost. Distributors broadly work on about 25% with lots of variations. So famously, UNFI has a national contract with Whole Foods where they work on cost plus. With big chains, they do a similar thing. But when it comes to them calculating their wholesale price in their catalog, historically it's been a 25% gross margin. Meaning, if you're selling it to UNFI or KeHE or any other distributor for $1, they would divide by 0.75 to get to $1.33, which would be their published wholesale price. So mapping out some of this, where do I want to land on the shelf, working backwards to understand what your price to a distributor needs to be, and then doing your pro forma or projected P&L where you plug in something for returns, discounts, allowances, trade spending, seeing where your net sales come out, plugging in your cost of goods, seeing where your gross profit comes out, dividing your gross profit into your net sales to see where your gross margin comes out, and then running through the rest of the P&L, something for warehousing and transportation, something for selling expenses, and then sort of it's really making lists of things, right? Mm-hmm. To see either what you're likely to need to invest your first year to launch, because you're going to be doing a lot of spending ahead of the sales. It could be putting brokers on retainer. It could be, getting into trade shows. It could be doing, trials with your co-packer, getting the package designed, and so on. So itemizing all those things gives you a good idea of how much money you're going to need, whether it be from savings, friends and family, or outside investors. And so those are some of the very first things I would do. And then in terms of mapping out a go-to-market plan, it's similarly starting to put down where you might do your pilot, and then what regions and channels you're likely to go into. Is it the Northeast U.S.? Is it the Rocky Mountain region? Is it the Upper Midwest? So who are those target stores you're going to be going after? How are those stores serviced? By which distributors? How are you going to do that execution of getting in front of the buyers? Usually it's with brokers and contract sales organizations. So, mapping all that out, both in terms of an outline and then reflecting it in a spreadsheet or a sales model, is, the basic fundamentals of putting a simple plan together.
That's a lot of information to unpack. I'll certainly put a link to your website into the Natural Products Field Manual. Thank you for going through that. So if I'm a small natural brand and I created something in my kitchen or in my garage and it's the most amazing thing, even my mom likes it, where do I go? Where do I start? What do I do first before I even start down that path? How do I start learning about this stuff?
Yeah, so a great resource. I know you've been to many fancy food shows. Mm-hmm. The Specialty Food Association is the non-profit trade organization that produces the Fancy Food Show. And they, the Saturday before the Fancy Food Show, they have a very inexpensive program called The Basics. And it's everything from getting a license, if you're making it in your kitchen, so you can set a farmer's market, to going to a commercial kitchen, to going to a co-packer, to how one gets UPC codes, GS1, going on the GS1 website, and all of that. So there are resources like that. I mentioned, or you mentioned, thankfully, I have the Natural Products Field Manual, which is a very comprehensive resource guide, how-to guide, which includes content, databases of stores, coupons for services, and some consulting time by me. And then in a lot of major markets, there are communities. So where you are, Dan, in the Denver Boulder area, there's Naturally Boulder, and as you may know, there's now Naturally Bay Area, Naturally Chicago, soon to be Naturally Brooklyn, Naturally Austin. And so you plug into these communities, and there's a lot of peer exchange. Sometimes they have educational programs, and then of course some of the trade publications, whether it be Natural Food Merchandiser, Whole Foods Magazine, BevNet, Nosh, they'll have good content and good educational programs as well.
Appreciate
so I think all these help people.
Well, I appreciate you going through that because that's so important because, I've got a great idea. Where do I go? And that's the first question everyone I speak to say, that's the first question usually I hear from young brands. So I'm starting to put together my plan. At what point do you recommend that you bring someone in to look over your shoulder and make sure that your plan makes sense? And where I'm going here is that when we've done some of the pitch slam things, etc., that we've done together, you've done a lot of them. At what point do you bring in a mentor to help you, and then how do you find that mentor beyond some of those groups?
Well, I mean, really as early as you can. In other words, you can certainly go through a little bit of the feasibility that we've been talking about so far. So if you have an idea for a product, if you go out and see what other similar products are selling for, and even if you're going to be premium priced to whatever's on the market already, you might have an idea of where you want this to price out on the shelf. Like, hey, I'm going to be doing this fantastic, I don't know, energy bar, granola, non-dairy frozen dessert, and I know that the competitive products are at $4.99. I think I could be out there at $6 or $7.99. You do a little bit of the back of the envelope that we've talked through, and you say, well, based on what I learned, the retailer makes this 40% for a food item, distributor makes 25, I need to have a 40 after all these expenses. My cost of goods needs to come in around 150 or 2 or something like that when you run the numbers. And then you might have an idea, either because you're working with someone who does formulation, you might have some early preliminary discussions with co-manufacturers or co-packers, or even based on what you've learned yourself of what certain ingredients cost, based on what those key ingredients are likely to be, you might be able to at least go through that feasibility on your own. And then I would say it's worth trying to get some outside help. And there are companies out there who commercialize products, i.e. do formulation, find co-packers, help with operations. There are people like me who help with sort of go-to-market, growth strategy, how to put a sales plan together, how to put a marketing plan together, who are the right resources to work with in terms of brokers, contract sales, brand management, branding in terms of package design and marketing and all of that. And even if you're totally sort of winging it on your own, what some people will do is take it as far as they can, and that means making it in their kitchen, having some level of confidence they're not going to kill anybody or make anybody sick, either because they've been licensed or they've had a commercial kitchen, sort of vet them on food safety and all of that. And then they might go out to farmers markets. And that's often a farmers market, a Saturday market, is where so many large companies have started, where you get that early sense of, wow, people are really excited about this. They love it. There's no hesitation at paying $6.99, $7.99. I see the same people coming back week after week. They really love it. They really want it. They want to get more of it. They've asked me to do new flavors or try this or try that. That's a place a lot of people start. And then from there, it's maybe finding a commercial kitchen or a small co-packer where somebody can make it more efficiently than you at a lower cost than you, and that's where you start to do your pilot and then go from there. Gotcha. That's like a fairly common sequence that people go through.
And I love the idea that you're trying, like you said, in your backyard. Great advice. So you're learning in your backyard. You're trying it with real people to see what the capabilities, what the possibility is for putting this product together and getting it to market. What suggestions do you have for a brand that's starting to work with a retailer? How does a brand prepare to work with a retailer? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it's kind of where the rubber hits the road, because this is where some of the things I touched on earlier, whether it's getting help from someone like you or me or talking to a friendly broker, but to understand how your product fits with the strategic objectives of the retailer. What are you bringing to the party in terms of category growth? What are some of their objectives as a category manager or buyer? It's going to be things like sales growth, margin growth, basket size, penny profit, attracting new users, etc. So how do you fit into that whole story? And so getting some help thinking about that's important. And again, it all feeds into doing your homework, not just going in and checking the stores, but if you can, try to get a hold of some data. If you can, look at industry trade publications and online where they might review categories and what's going on in a specific category in terms of growth, subcategories, areas of growth, consumer trends. If you have a product that is keto friendly, that's a good thing right now. If you have a product that has CBD, that could be a good thing right now, depending on where you are and what the category is. If you're plant-based, that's on trend if you're highly differentiated. So having a good sense of what's going on in macro trends and where you fit, and then specifically where you fit in the retailer's category is very important. And then one of the things that a lot of people find helpful is engaging with a broker. And so brokers, for those who aren't familiar, might be akin to a manufacturer's rep in other industries. They work as a partner of yours. They work as an extension of your sales team. What they usually have to offer is access to the retailer. If you're cold calling a buyer, you might find it very challenging to get an appointment, whereas a good broker might be in to see that buyer once a week, 3 times a month, etc. They also can help advise you on specific go-to-market for their region, their geography, their channel, where they understand those buyers, what they're looking for, what are their pet programs, what support are they looking for from the supplier, i.e. you, in terms of promotions, demos, other kinds of investments in their programs, depending on what they offer. So the broker should advise you on all that before you even go in and have the meeting. And then the broker can also give you some feedback on pricing, margin requirements for the retailer and distributor, and other things that you need to know that might be specific to that channel and to that region. And so there are brokers organized by channel, i.e. natural and specialty and grocery, as well as club in chain drug. And in some big retailers, they have their own ecosystem of brokers, such as Target-specific brokers, Walmart-specific brokers, Costco-specific brokers, and so on. So that's often, when you're ready to go into those kinds of retailers, engaging with a broker is a good step. And I'm imagining you might ask me how one finds a good broker. And
call you.
Like anything, you could call me or call you, but it's also networking with your peers. You're also, if you do have any contact with retailers and distributors, you can certainly ask them who they think might be a good fit for you. It's not always true that, big brokers work with big brands and small brokers work with small brands, but someone who might have experience in your category, someone who the retailer or industry friend or distributor might think might be a good fit for a brand like yours in a category like yours. And when you talk to brokers, many of them work on a commission based on net sales. 5% is usually the starting point. If you're a new brand with very little existing business, they'll often want a retainer. A retainer is a minimum monthly guaranteed commission, if you will. And they'll often structure the program as, you pay us 5% or $500 a month, whichever is greater, depending on the region, depending on the channel, etc. National retainers could be anywhere from $12,000 to $15,000 a month, depending on, total U.S., depending on the broker, depending on your category, etc.
So,
Go ahead.
please, no, go ahead, please.
No, the last thing I was going to say is the most important part of the discussion when you're talking to brokers. You'll go through all the perfunctory things of, who's on their team, what region they cover, what channels they cover, who they call on, what other brands they represent. Just, again, all common sense questions. But the most important part of the discussion is that you both agree on objectives together and you have an agreement of expectations. And the biggest reason why I see these relationships not work out is when there's a mismatch of expectations. And so rather than say to your broker, I'd like you to grow sales, I'd like you to grow distribution, you might say, I would like to get these 4 SKUs into these 60 stores over the next 90 days. And the broker says back to you, I can do that. Or the broker says back to you, I can do that if you give me the right tools, which might include promotions, free fills, a budget for demos, and things like that, that will enable them to get that done. And then once you've agreed on those objectives, you then want to have some kind of ongoing review process. There might be a 90-day check-in, there might be a 6-month check-in, there might be an annual review, very similar to what you would do with your own employees. Or if a founder, worked at a bigger company before starting the business, the kind of thing they would have experienced as an employee.
Thank you for sharing that. And actually, that was going to be my next question, is how do you hold them accountable? So when you're talking about working with a broker, how do you manage all of that? I mean, you've shared a lot. Brokers that work in specific regions, brokers that have expertise across multiple channels. As a small brand, how do I manage that? How do I not get caught up in so many things going on that I can't keep track of them, and I can't effectively keep the hand on my wheel of my own ship, the rudder of my own ship?
Yeah. No, that's a really good question because, as a founder, if we go back to where we started, mapping out a very simple plan, being clear on what you're looking to accomplish, thinking about over what period of time, thinking about what resources are required, there's a couple of places that you can invest in additional help. So one is, if you're a founder who's doing everything, you really need to think about what is the highest and best use of your time and what things might you be able to delegate. So in some cases, you might say, look, as a founder, my best contribution to my business is being focused on innovation, being focused on brand building, being focused on, sales or building out distribution. And for those other things, I need to bring in some help. And it might be an all-purpose utility person who's a right-hand person who's doing light bookkeeping, customer service, coordinating things with your co-manufacturer or co-packer, coordinating logistics with a public warehouse or 3PL. That's one place. The other is there's another category of service provider between you and the broker, and that's called a brand management company. What they are is a contract sales organization. 20 years ago, they might have been called a master broker. And what it is it allows you to sort of outsource your sales management to this team. And some are big teams of 20, 30 people. Some are smaller teams of 10 people, 5 people. Some are one-off individuals where they do all the things a VP of sales would do if you had one, but they're doing it part-time for you and other companies. So you're getting it at a lower cost. You're sort of getting them part-time, but you're getting them where they add the most strategic value to your business. It's managing brokers, helping with headquarter calls, helping a little bit with the go-to-market plan, and again, being less expensive than you hiring a full-time VP of sales too early. Eventually you'll want to do that, but the risk of hiring the wrong person is very high.
Any other thoughts? Anything
So
that we've missed?
I do. So the first thing I wanted to say is, when you referred back to my background, in my book, in my introduction, I say this is a compendium of all my bad judgment, expensive mistakes, and blown calls. And I'm not being falsely modest when I say that. So people like you and me and other friends of ours kind of learned the hard way because we grew up with the industry, and as with all the changes and evolution, and it's adapting as things change and evolve. That's one thing. The other thing I would say for all your viewers and listeners is I can't think of a better time to be launching a product, both in terms of all the ways to reach consumers, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's direct-to-consumer, meal kits, you name it, as well as access to capital. Between all of those accelerators, crowdfunding, angels, family offices, as well as many of the large CPGs have their own incubators. So everyone from General Mills, Campbell's, Kellogg's, Pepsi, Coke, I don't want to leave any out, Danone, many others have these incubators. And so if you've got a great idea, if it's on trend, if it's innovative, chances are not only will you have new and different ways to reach consumers, but you're going to have new and different ways to access capital. That's going to be a little easier and a little more available than even 5 or 10 years ago.
Thank you for sharing that. And I've had the privilege of working with some of the brands through a couple of those different incubators, and I love the passion and enthusiasm. So you're getting the big CPG experience. To your point, I've got scars on top of scars. And if you can learn from someone like us, that's going to save you a lot of headaches, a lot of sleepless nights, etc. So take advantage of it. And again, that's what I think is so great about natural, is what I say, what makes natural natural, is that we're a community that is willing, able, eager to help you succeed. It's not about similar to, back in the old days when I started in this in big CPG, where it was them versus us. Now it's we're a community. How do we help each other grow? Thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts? And then also, how do we find out more about you and what you do, the field manual, etc.?
No, I think that covered a lot of it in terms of, I would say this was a good distillation. I think based on some of the questions that you shared with me about essential things to think about. Mm-hmm. And then as far as me, I mentioned earlier, my website is naturalconsulting.com. You can see my background, my clients, my services. You can see about the Natural Products Field Manual, which is a whole package of content, databases, coupons for services. And I think you're in there, Dan, for a coupon, as well as some consulting time for me. And then I do my 2-day sales seminar and 1 day in raising capital. I do them every December in Boston. So this December 10, 11, 12. December 10, 11 is sales. 12th is financing. These are great networking events as well as great content. We've got upwards of a dozen expert speakers, plus sponsors, plus companies of all sizes and stages in the room. And then the 1 day on raising capital, we typically have 2 institutional investors. We usually have an angel or a family office. We have a strategic. We have a debt expert. And then we have an entrepreneur who share their experience raising capital. And then we've been alternating Chicago and San Francisco in the spring. So we haven't set dates yet. But we've also had calls to consider doing it in LA or Denver or somewhere else. So that remains to be seen.
Yeah,
and thanks for asking that.
No, I appreciate your sharing that. Thanks. And I had the privilege of going to one of your events in Chicago, and I liked it. It was well worth it. So thank you. Again, another opportunity, another resource for brands to start figuring out where do you go. And knowledge is power. And the more you know, the fewer headaches, heartaches, etc. And so bottom line is we want to help these brands succeed. So thank you so much for your time. I'm going to be sure to leave a link to your website, to the Field Products Manual in the podcast show notes and in the end of this video. And anyhow, thank you.
And I want to add one last thing, and this is not, the Mutual Admiration Society, but for all your viewers, anyone who's doing anything in natural products should, in addition to getting Natural Foods Merchandiser, should also get Whole Foods Magazine. Mm-hmm. And I would strongly encourage them to read the articles that you've written on category management and how to, fit in with those strategic objectives of the retailer.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to provide value, trying to raise the bar in the industry. So thank you so much for your time. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay, thanks, Bob. I want to thank Bob for coming on today and for sharing his wisdom and his insights. This information is so critically important for every brand, whether you're an existing brand or you're a startup brand. In podcast episode 99, we share a lot of additional insights. You're going to want to go back and check that out. I'll be certain to put a link to Natural Products Consulting and the Natural Products Field Manual in the podcast show notes and on the podcast webpage. This week's free download is the Essential New Item Checklist, the recipe for success. I thought that this would be perfect because we outline a lot of the different things you need to know in this podcast. The Essential New Item Checklist, the recipe for success, lays the foundation for everything that Bob and I talked about today. More importantly, it's the foundation that you need to have in place to build a healthy, thriving, successful brand. On top of that, I also share a lot of the strategies that you can use to explode sales. Things that you need to know about. For example, how to properly manage your broker, something we talked a little bit about earlier. Anyhow, you're going to be able to download this on today's podcast show notes and on today's podcast webpage. You can get there by going to brandsecretsandstrategies.com/session 136. I appreciate you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.